The sun dipped low over the city skyline as Sarah lounged on her couch, swiping through the endless stream of Tinder profiles. Her fingers flicked left and right, assessing each face that flashed across her screen. Most were forgettable, but then she stumbled upon Jake's profile. He had a winning smile and bright eyes that seemed to twinkle in the dim light of her apartment. His bio was witty, and his interests aligned perfectly with hers. Sarah's heart fluttered as she swiped right, taking a chance on this seemingly perfect match. Within minutes, a notification popped up. "You've matched with Jake." Sarah's pulse quickened with excitement. She eagerly typed out a message, wondering what this new connection might bring. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, each message revealing more about themselves. Jake was charming and funny, with a hint of mystery that intrigued Sarah. Before she knew it, they had been chatting for hours, and Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this could be something special. As the night deepened, they exchanged numbers and made plans to meet for coffee the next day. Sarah drifted off to sleep with a smile on her face, anticipation coursing through her veins. Little did she know, this seemingly perfect match would soon turn into a nightmare she couldn't escape. The next day dawned with a soft glow filtering through Sarah's curtains, casting a warm light across her room. She tossed and turned, excitement and nerves jumbling in her stomach like a whirlwind. Today was the day she would meet Jake. Dressed in her favorite jeans and a cute top, Sarah arrived at the cozy cafe Jake had suggested. She spotted him sitting at a corner table, a smile spreading across his face as he saw her approach. "Sarah." "Hey." Jake stood up, pulling out a chair for her. His voice was smooth, sending a shiver down Sarah's spine. They exchanged pleasantries as they sipped their coffees, conversation flowing effortlessly. Sarah found herself drawn to Jake's easy charm and captivating stories, but as the date progressed, subtle signs of possessiveness began to surface. Jake would casually inquire about Sarah's plans for the rest of the day, wanting to know if she had any other appointments. He insisted on paying for her coffee, brushing off her attempts to split the bill. At one point, he even reached across the table to adjust a strand of Sarah's hair without asking. Despite these red flags, Sarah brushed them off, chalking them up to Jake's eagerness to impress her. By the time they parted ways with promises of seeing each other again, Sarah was already envisioning a future with Jake. Little did she know, this seemingly perfect first date was just the beginning of a descent into darkness she never could have imagined. Days turned into weeks, and Sarah found herself falling deeper into Jake's world. Their texting became constant, with Jake bombarding her with messages throughout the day. At first, Sarah felt flattered by his attention, but soon it became overwhelming. Jake began to expect immediate responses to his texts, growing impatient if Sarah didn't reply within minutes. He would ask where she was and what she was doing, as if he needed to know her every move. Sarah started to feel suffocated by his constant presence, even when they were apart. Things took a darker turn when Jake started showing up unexpectedly at places Sarah had mentioned in passing. He would surprise her at her favorite coffee shop or show up at her gym unannounced. Each time, Sarah was taken aback by his sudden appearances, but Jake brushed it off as coincidence. As Jake's possessiveness escalated, Sarah found herself making excuses to avoid seeing him. She canceled plans at the last minute, claiming to be busy with work or other commitments. But Jake wouldn't take no for an answer. He would send pleading messages, begging her to reconsider and promising to change his behavior. Sarah felt torn between her growing unease and the desire to give Jake another chance. But deep down, she knew something wasn't right. One night, as Sarah lay in bed scrolling through her phone, a new message notification popped up. "I miss you, Sarah. I wish I could see you right now." It was from Jake, and his words sent a chill down her spine. Sarah glanced out her window, feeling a sense of unease creeping over her. She couldn't shake the feeling that Jake was watching her, even in the darkness of the night. And little did she know, her worst fears were about to become a terrifying reality. The next morning, Sarah woke up with a sense of dread gnawing at her insides. She couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, even in the safety of her own apartment. Jake's incessant messages had become a constant source of anxiety, and Sarah knew she needed to take action. With trembling fingers, she opened her phone and navigated to Jake's contact. She hovered over the block button, hesitating for a moment before finally pressing it. A wave of relief washed over her as his messages instantly stopped coming through. But Jake wasn't one to give up easily. Within hours, Sarah started receiving messages from new, unfamiliar numbers, each one more desperate than the last. Jake pleaded with her to unblock him, promising to change and swearing that he couldn't live without her. Sarah's resolve wavered, but she knew she couldn't go back. She refused to let Jake's toxic behavior consume her any longer. With a sense of determination, she blocked each new number as it appeared, cutting off Jake's access to her life. Days passed and Sarah started to feel like herself again. She spent time with friends, threw herself into her work, and tried to put the nightmare of Jake behind her. But just when she thought she was safe, a new message popped up on her phone. "I'm watching you right now." Sarah's heart skipped a beat as she read the words, her hands trembling with fear. She slowly looked up from her phone and out the window, her eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. And there, lurking in the darkness, stood Jake. Panic surged through Sarah's veins as she realized the extent of Jake's obsession. He had found her, despite her efforts to block him out, and now he was watching her every move, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she stared out the window, frozen in fear. Jake's silhouette loomed in the darkness, his eyes fixed on her apartment like a predator stalking its prey. She felt a cold sweat break out on her forehead as she realized the danger she was in. With trembling hands, Sarah fumbled for her phone, her mind racing with panic. She dialed 911, her voice shaking as she whispered her address to the dispatcher. Every second felt like an eternity as she waited for help to arrive, the fear of what Jake might do closing in around her. Suddenly, a loud knock echoed through the apartment, causing Sarah to jump in terror. She clutched her phone tightly, her heart pounding in her chest. "Police." "Open up," a voice called from outside her door. With a shaky breath, Sarah rushed to unlock the door, relief flooding through her as she saw the uniformed officer standing in the hallway. She quickly explained the situation, her words tumbling out in a jumble as she recounted Jake's relentless harassment. The officers sprang into action, their expressions grim as they listened to Sarah's story. They assured her that they would do everything in their power to keep her safe, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of dread that gripped her heart. As the night wore on, Sarah huddled in her apartment, the sound of her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Every creak of the floorboard sent a shiver down her spine, every shadow morphing into the figure of Jake in her mind. Hours passed without incident, but Sarah knew the danger hadn't passed. She couldn't shake the feeling that Jake was still out there, lurking in the darkness, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Just as she started to drift into an uneasy sleep, her phone buzzed with a new message. She hesitated before unlocking it, her breath catching in her throat as she read the words. "I'm not done with you yet, Sarah." Terror gripped Sarah's heart as she realized that her nightmare was far from over. And as the darkness closed in around her, she knew that she would have to fight to survive the night of terror that lay ahead. The next morning dawned with a sense of eerie calm hanging over Sarah's apartment. She had barely slept, the events of the previous night replaying in her mind like a broken record. But despite her fear, she knew she couldn't let Jake's threats control her life. With a determined set to her jaw, Sarah decided to take matters into her own hands. She contacted the police again, insisting that they take action against Jake before it was too late. This time they listened. A team of detectives was assigned to Sarah's case, their expressions serious as they pored over the evidence she had gathered. They assured her that they would do everything in their power to bring Jake to justice, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered in the air. As the investigation progressed, Sarah found herself thrust into a world of fear and uncertainty. She installed security cameras around her apartment, her every move now captured on film. She took self-defense classes, learning how to protect herself against the threat that loomed over her. But Jake was always one step ahead, his messages becoming more frequent and more threatening with each passing day. He knew where she lived, where she worked, where she liked to spend her free time. And no matter how hard she tried to escape him, he was always there, lurking in the shadows. Despite her fear, Sarah refused to back down. She attended every meeting with the detectives, providing them with any information that might lead to Jake's capture. She reached out to friends and family for support, leaning on them in her darkest moments. And finally, after weeks of tireless effort, a breakthrough came. The detectives traced one of Jake's messages back to its source, leading them straight to his doorstep. With a warrant in hand, they raided his apartment, uncovering a chilling collection of evidence that linked him to Sarah's harassment. Jake was arrested on the spot, his expression one of shock and disbelief as he was led away in handcuffs. And as Sarah watched him being taken away, she felt a sense of relief wash over her. The nightmare was finally over. But even as Jake was taken into custody, Sarah knew that the scars he had left behind would never fully heal. She had been pushed to the brink of despair, forced to confront the darkest corners of her own mind. But through it all, she had emerged stronger, more resilient than ever before. As she stepped out into the sunlight, a sense of hope bloomed in her chest. She may have faced the darkest night of her life, but she had come out on the other side. And as she walked away from the shadows of her past, she knew that nothing would ever hold her back again. With Jake behind bars, Sarah hoped for a sense of closure, but the nightmare lingered like a shadow in the back of her mind. She couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of Jake's presence lurking just beyond her line of sight. It was as if his obsession with her had taken on a life of its own. As the days passed, Sarah tried to resume some semblance of normalcy. She returned to work, spent time with friends, and tried to reclaim the life that had been stolen from her. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the feeling that Jake was still out there, waiting, watching, biding his time. Then, one evening, as Sarah was walking home from work, she felt a chill run down her spine. She glanced over her shoulder, her heart pounding in her chest, and there he was, Jake, standing in the shadows, his eyes fixed on her with a look of twisted determination. Fear gripped Sarah's heart, but this time, she refused to let it consume her. With a steely resolve, she marched over to where Jake was standing, her fists clenched at her sides. "What do you want?" "Jake," she demanded, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and fear. Jake's expression softened, his eyes pleading with her for forgiveness. "Sarah, I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you. I just couldn't stand the thought of losing you." Sarah's stomach churned at his words, a wave of nausea washing over her. She knew she should walk away, that engaging with Jake would only lead to more pain. But something inside her refused to back down. "You need help, Jake," she said, her voice firm, "and I can't be the one to give it to you. You need to let me go once and for all." For a moment, Jake seemed to waver, his resolve faltering. But then, with a look of resignation, he nodded. "You're right, Sarah," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll leave you alone. I promise." And with that, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness like a ghost. Sarah watched him go, her heart heavy with a mixture of relief and sadness. As she made her way home, Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of closure wash over her. Jake may have been a part of her past, but she refused to let him define her future. And as she stepped into the warmth of her apartment, she knew that she was finally free. Free from Jake, free from fear, and free to live her life on her own terms. The days turned into weeks, and with each passing moment, Sarah felt the weight of Jake's presence slowly lifting from her shoulders. She no longer jumped at every shadow or flinch at the sound of her phone ringing. Instead, she began to reclaim the life that had been stolen from her. But just as Sarah started to breathe easier, a sense of unease lingered in the air. She couldn't shake the feeling that Jake was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And try as she might, she couldn't escape the memories of the terror he had inflicted upon her. Then, one night, as Sarah lay in bed, a new message popped up on her phone. Her heart skipped a beat as she read the words. "I'm not finished with you yet, Sarah. You can't escape me." Fear clawed at Sarah's chest as she stared at the message, her mind racing with a million different thoughts. She knew she had to do something, but she couldn't shake the feeling of helplessness that washed over her. In a moment of desperation, Sarah reached out to the one person she knew could help her, Detective Ramirez, the lead investigator on her case. She explained the situation, her voice trembling with fear as she recounted the chilling message she had received. Detective Ramirez assured her that they would do everything in their power to keep her safe, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of dread that gnawed at her insides. She knew she couldn't stay in her apartment any longer, not with Jake still out there, lurking in the shadows. With Detective Ramirez's help, Sarah arranged to stay with a friend in another city, far away from the memories of her ordeal. She packed her bags hastily, her heart racing with a sense of urgency. She knew she had to leave, and she had to leave now. As she stepped out into the cool night air, Sarah felt a sense of relief wash over her. She was leaving behind the darkness of her past and stepping into the light of a new beginning. And as she drove away, the weight that had been pressing down on her shoulders lifted, and she felt as if she could finally breathe again. Jake may have haunted her nightmares, but Sarah refused to let him control her life any longer. She was free, free to live without fear, free to chase her dreams, and free to be herself. And as she drove into the night, she knew that the road ahead would be filled with endless possibilities.